Welcome to Focus on Liberia. This is yet another edition of the Liberian History Channel with Scholar Call Famula, who is a historian and also the FOL Public Policy Analyst. We've been doing this for some time now, and we are happy to bring you another edition. Happy weekend. Hope you are having a wonderful time. We want to welcome all our viewers from across the globe. But first, let's welcome Mrs. Carl Famula to this edition. Carl, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dennis. Hello, everybody. It's going to be a good session today. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm excited, and I hope you are too. If you are home or anywhere and you are excited, please invite a friend and enjoy the show. Last week we talked about something, and it has been the birth of the African Republic, and that's Liberia. So this is part 4 of the birth of the African Republic. We've gone through. Last week we were talking about those guys, that started from the beginning, like Paul Coffey, Daniel Cocker, or Juhidi Ashmon, and we spoke about land acquisition, how they got the land and how people, their concession agreements. We talk about even when they came, how many of these, what they were doing during those early stages. Today we're going to be focusing on, when they started, there were some conflicts, and they had to make laws to be able to deal with what they were having. And we also see the role of the ACS during that time, and what were some of the issues that they were involved with. What were some of the issues when it came to the repatriated Africans or the recaptured Africans and the African Americans that were taken from the United States. We're going to go into all that. And so, Carl, again, welcome. We're glad to have you. And thank you again for taking up the time to be here. I want to thank our viewers for always taking the time to watch and share the show.
Yes, absolutely. So today we're basically going to be focused on, it's a continuous topic. So we're just doing section at a time and trying to progress chronologically. But the focus today is going to be mostly on law, order, subjection, and sovereignty. That was the same theme for last session, but we kind of talked in more detail about, the circumstances leading up to, the documentation of laws. So now we're going to talk about the laws that were set up in 1824 when the colony was first named Liberia. It was in 1824, and when they started to, kind of put some rules, some real formal and strict rules into place. There were some loose rules that were there before, but in 1824, they got very rigid. And so that's what we're going to discuss, some of the reasons why. The purpose of doing this is because there's a convention or a mindset that in 1822, when these people arrived, they were already sovereign. That was it, you're free. So we're 200 years old now because Liberia was established in 1822. And, there's no legal basis for that. Sovereignty is not represented in these laws. And you're going to see how these were laws really of subjection and subjugation and not really of a sovereign, self-governing people.
Thank you, Carl. And before we go into today's topic, being the host of this show, I continue to get feedback. And one of those feedback I'm getting, I'm going to share with you to get your input is there's a narrative out there that Liberia history, Liberia has in fact, there are nobody writing books about Liberia. There are no books. In fact, all the history we got is about A. Doris Bank Henrys or Dualu, John Kizo, Dualu Bokili, and all these things. That's all we have. So they continue to ask me, so let me put that to you. When we are talking about Liberian history, where are we getting these things from?
I think that people don't want to search for history, and that's right, they shouldn't have to. There should be an established curriculum that gives people a general understanding of who they are, where they've come from, who they descend from, and what circumstances occurred before their birth to create the world as it is. And that understanding should be part of your education process. So I think when we hear people say that, what they're really saying is, this information was not presented to us. This information was not presented to us in school as it should have been. And I'm in agreement with that. Doris Banks Henry's and her folklore and early childhood education books that she wrote are adequate for the purpose that they serve. There should have been, and there still should be, a very detailed, clear, concise history of Liberia from the perspective of Liberian people. That's what's missing. And I believe that, Dr. Allen, Dr. Dunn, Brewer, and others are actually, the custodians of this information for our generation. And I think they're in the process of correcting some of this. Dr. Dunn, Dr. Guanu, and others have spent their lives documenting books, writing books and documenting our history. Textbooks, Dr. Guanu has textbooks that are in the school system. So it's not that there's no books at all. I think that it's just that if you're not taking a book, a class specific to it, or if you don't go to certain institutions, you're not going to be able to have access to the information. But, my understanding is Dr. Guanu's books are part of the curriculum already.
Thank you, Carl. And you are, no ageism here, but you are pretty young and you spend most of your time or your formative years in the United States. So the question is, how does Carl know all this?
I study. I have an insatiable curiosity, and I've had this passion for our history since I was a child. I've been studying under the tutelage of Professor Mahmoud Al-Kati and many others. But the advantage that I have is that where I live, where I spend most of my life, I have access to information because I live in the United States. So not only about being curious, but having access to world-class libraries. And much of our history is in U.S. archives, whether it be government or private archives. Much of our history is in U.S. libraries and other government archives. And so, far more is here in the United States about Liberia than even what's existing in Liberia, which is, clearly for obvious reasons.
Thank you. All right. Even before we start the show, comments are coming in, and the first comment is, "Ever say nice shirt, Mr. John."
I agree.
In a whole, so if you want me to advertise your shirt, so you so and then Batam Kula is saying, even before we start, can we resolve the issue whether Liberia was ever colonized? I have held the belief that the landmass which became Liberia was colonized by the ACS for settlement by free blacks who had been enslaved in America. However, the nation state established called Liberia was never colonized by Europeans. Let's hold that thought. I just want to bring it in as we start the discussion today. Right? So, Batom, we're going to answer that question and we're going to go into it. And Elvis, thank you for the comment on the shirt. So let's begin like this. As we say, let's talk about the laws, how this whole thing came together. And again, just before we even go into that, let's start a little bit on the maybe few sentences on the ACS being the one responsible to bring people to Liberia and settle here. Let's look at the ACS role in establishing what we have as Liberia today. Just briefly to touch on ACS.
So we've covered this actually thoroughly in the other two sessions, but I don't want to, kind of distract from it. But the American Colonization Society, in partnership with the U.S. government, sought to seek a place of asylum for liberated captive Africans, really. It's based on the 1819 Act, where they were trying to repatriate enslaved, African-born enslaved people who were rescued or recaptured, is the language they used in that time period, from unlawful pirate slave ships, because the transatlantic slave ship had been abolished. So what they wanted to do was find a place. They basically wanted to send them back to Africa because they didn't want them free and liberated in the United States. There's a lot of racism and other things pushing this. So you couldn't possibly send all of these people back to their original place of origin. One, it would be almost impossible to find out where many of them came from. They didn't speak English. It was just too cumbersome. The other issue is, if they were to go back to the exact place they came from, they may be subject to be sold into slavery again. So they needed a place of asylum. So contrary to popular belief, the U.S. government role was to send agents for recaptured Africans. And it was the ACS that had agents for African Americans who were being repatriated. And they worked with missionaries, and the missionaries played dual roles. One, of course, to set up churches and schools, but also to try to help acclimate the recaptured Africans to the Western way of life, to become Christians and to wear Western clothing and to obtain, Western education system and style of life. And so that was what was happening. This is not colonization, and I've said this on previous shows. Colonization has two definitions. The first definition is political colonization, which is what most people think of when they think of colonial Africa, which means one country is asserting its dominion over other land and other people. So this country now owns the land and the people in this colony, and you become a subject of the country, and the land belongs to the country. So all of Great Britain's colonies, the land within belonged to Great Britain. So when Great Britain colonized the Gold Coast, they owned the land, not the people, but the colony, or the colonial power owned the land and all its resources, including the human resources. In the situation of Liberia, it's definition number 2, which just basically means a settlement of people in a place. So, to simplify it. So Liberia, when they say colony, it was a settlement. The same way that, you had various colonies in what is now the United States, even before the British officially colonized it. So it's two completely different definitions. Sierra Leone was a colony or a settlement, which is a synonym to definition 2 of colony, settlement. So Sierra Leone was a settlement until it was colonized by Great Britain. So I hope that clarifies that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So let's begin our today's conversation on the laws, and we'll go to our PowerPoint. We say law, order, subjection, and sovereignty.
Yes.
We have the early people. We have this colony. Let's talk about those early days when it comes to law, order, subjection, and sovereignty.
Sure. So the reason I want to emphasize on this, I want to talk a little bit about the atmosphere surrounding this whole thing. I believe from talking with people that the misconception is that everyone was getting along. Everyone, ACS was great. The African Americans were all happy to get on these boats, and they were, they respected the ACS. There was violent conflict right away. So you have, even as early as the Elizabeth, which is the first ship that departed. We talked about this on previous discussions. You had a recaptured African who got into a conflict with the U.S. agent for recaptured Africans, and they had to subdue all of the recaptured Africans into the hull of the ship because they were, agitated. And it was over some issue. One of them had a dog, and the dog must have gotten into, there was some issue with the dog, so they had to take all of basically the dogs away from these people, and they threw them overboard. And this was a traumatic event. They threw all of the dogs overboard. When they got to what is now Sierra Leone, many of them refused to go on to Cape Masorado. They refused to follow ACS to Cape Masorado. So that was the second act of rebellion occurred at what is now Sierra Leone. So when they found or were able to negotiate for the land at Cape Masorado, and they wanted to transfer. They sent the ship Alligator to transfer the people that had went to Sierra Leone on the Elizabeth and the Nautilus. When they went to go get those people, majority of them, including the great Daniel Cooker, who was a light-skinned, I'll use that word, African-American pastor, missionary, he and all refused to go along with ACS. Daniel Cooker chose to remain at Sierra Leone. So it wasn't only the recaptured Africans that had issues with ACS agents and the whole arrangement. It was also, a very scholarly, educated man like Daniel Cooker felt more comfortable in Sierra Leone as opposed to being subjected to the rule of the American Colonization Society.
And Carl, before we continue, because these are two ideas, you talk about the U.S. agent for recaptured Africans, and you have the ACS agent for the repatriated, right? So the United States government was involved in the recapture side, those Africans that were recaptured, and said, well, slavery is over, we have to send you back. That's what the United States was involved with. How did that play? How did the two come together, and why were they doing so?
Yeah, so slavery wasn't over. The United States still had slaves. What they ended was the transatlantic slave trade.
Yeah.
So because it was now illegal to bring new Africans from the continent to the United States, to Britain, those people were literally being, it was like human trafficking now, because it's now, there's still slavery, so there's still demand for human chattel, but they just didn't want new slaves coming in. And so they needed to, send these people back. And the second part of your question, I think, had to do with why did they get together? Well, ACS had a movement to try to also repatriate liberated African Americans. So there were a lot of freemen, Black freemen living in the northern states. And also, later on in the southern states, when they started to liberate them, they needed somewhere to go. These people did not want freemen living among them while slavery was still prominent in the South, because it served as an inspiration to enslaved people to basically to run away, to, escape slavery, because you could go in the North and there were other freemen that would help you, survive, get survival skills. So they wanted to get rid of these people. Secondly, a lot of these Black freemen were extremely successful. You had people doing very well, and they were outperforming European immigrants. And this was causing all kinds of racial tension and conflict. So there was a motivation there to get these people out. They weren't fighting for equality, but separation. So the two got together and said, hey, this is going to work well. We have freemen that we don't want here, and we have these recaptured Africans that we definitely don't want here. We can ask the freemen to help their role, and it was called their divine role, like their destiny was to enlighten and educate these benighted or ignorant Africans, their African brethren who couldn't read and write and who they considered to be savages. So it began with that, and that relationship then became a partnership where the African American families would take in recaptured Africans, almost like adopt them. And they were supposed to receive compensation from the U.S. government for doing so, for teaching what we call now the Congo people, or the recaptured Africans, how to read and write, and all of these things. Lot Carey with the Baptist Church, his role was to take care of that first group of recaptured Africans that went with him on the Nautilus, and also those who were on the Elizabeth. So when he got to Cape Masorado, his responsibility was to set up a school and kind of structure a process of acclimating these recaptured Africans to the to what they felt were better, was a better way of life.
Right. All right. So the Africans, the ACS are the agent that was responsible for the liberated Africans, and US who had the agent who was responsible for recaptured Africans. and these
Yes,
two groups were working together.
yes. And the US government was paying the ACS. So the US government was compensating the ACS for every recaptured African. And later on, the British government did it as well, because they were following a model that was going on in Sierra Leone already. So this became very lucrative. They're getting paid, they're getting provisions. The US government's sending, food, they're sending clothing, they're sending all kinds of resources, farming equipment, tools to help these new recaptured Africans be able to start a new life.
Yeah.
And ACS was in charge of the distribution of these resources.
I know they like us. I mean, I'm a refugee. I've been a refugee, right? So when you talk about this distribution and people are sending these things to say to help again, and we look at today what is taking place is like the U.S. really like us. They are giving us these things to be able to take care of ourselves and start a new life. These people are real good Christians. Was that the idea, you think?
I mean, just being a student of history and understanding how incredibly racist, I mean, this is a period that, white supremacy has taken hold, right? So they have now thoroughly bought into this concept of their racial supremacy. So they are looking at this as a great way to rid themselves of people who they felt would taint not only their culture and their physical environment, but possibly their bloodline down the road, because you've got these very successful, people. And a lot of these, especially these light-skinned, the Daniel Cookers and others of the world who were extremely, successful, were competitors to a lot of these people. So they didn't want them around, and so they created this whole concept of them going, hey, go and minister to your heathen brethren, in the land of your ancestors. And so it wasn't, in the time period, it would have been okay to say these things. I mean, today clearly it's not politically correct, but we don't want to project our modern mindset on the past either. We want to understand the context that these events took place in.
Thank you. That takes us back to our slide.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is just the title, notably up here, the U.S. flag flying over, at Cape Masorado there. That's really important for what we're about to talk about. So this is the beginning, of everything. And the American flag is flying at Cape Masorado because it's a settlement of Americans. Yeah. It's not an American colony. America does not exert its authority, so it is not colonized by America, and it is not even colonized by Americans. It is settled by Americans. So in the second definition, we don't consider that to be colonization. So you don't say it was settleized. It doesn't make any sense. So when you're talking about definition 2 of colonization, you don't say it was colonized. You say these are colonists, meaning these were settlers. These were people living in a foreign country, basically.
And that comes to even colonization has in the name ACS. I know we spoke about this before, because it has the name American Colonization Society. It's easy to think that, okay, it was the ACS then that colonized Liberia.
Right. And so this is before the land grab and the partitioning of Africa. This is before there was such a thing as Africa. I mean Africa being colonized. Okay. So the context of this is not political colonization. This is a settlement of people, and the idea was never for America to own, or exert itself over this as its territory or part of U.S. territory. No. So political colonization is exerting yourself as part. This is now part of your territory. This was, and it's a fuzzy gray area. We'll get into it a little bit more, but it's not the same thing at all. These people were basically being expelled from the United States and being placed almost in a reservation, you know, or in some type of confinement away from the mainland, is what they were doing. You know, to back up a little bit, there was a time when you know, most of the United States was still unexplored, and they, you know, were even thinking about sending these people to the western part of the United States. Before thinking about sending them back to Africa. That part came along with the fact that they wanted to send recaptured Africans back to Africa. But if it were not for the recaptured Africans, they were thinking to just give these people their own state, like their own, you know, province within the continental US.
Yeah.
That's also very important to note.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Focus on Liberia, and we are discussing Liberian history on the Liberian History channel. So let's start with the laws. We have a summary of the laws in the colony of Liberia. This is August 19, 1824.
Yes. So on the 19th of August in the year 1824, they basically named the colony, the settlement. They called the settlement Liberia. And this is very important. The settlement of Liberia was really just Cape Masorado. The settlement of Liberia was not Sino, it was not Bassa, it was not any of these other places along the coast in 1824. When they named, what they named Liberia is essentially Monrovia and it's in its immediate vicinity.
That's interesting.
And that's 1824 when these laws were written. Because a lot of things changed. Last time we talked about the various colonization societies, because there was more than one. And they were all separate and independent for some time before they merged. So you had the Mississippi Colonization Society, you had the New York Colonization Society, you had, you know, all of these states had their own independent societies.
So like people that were in what is now Sino, Maryland, at that time you had the same people in those areas, or
nobody had gone there to settle yet.
Okay, just around Cape Masorado.
And you know, so when people did start going there to settle, it was not ACS, it was different colonization societies. Just like you had colonization societies, you know, you had the Sierra Leone company setting up colonies on, you know, west of Liberia, right? It was the same concept. So this is another argument against this whole colonialism thing, America colonizing, because you're talking about separate private ventures to go and say, hey, you guys go stay here. You know, if 500 of us get up today and we move to Brazil and we settle in Brazil, we're not colonizing Brazil.
Right. Yeah, but when 500, and I like that example, when 500 of us leave from here and go to Brazil, settle there and impose our way of life, or maybe impose is not the right word, impose our culture and way of life, and then we are the one writing the laws for all the people, then it is colonizing, don't you think?
So that's not what happened.
Okay.
That's not what happened. I mean, in 1824, nobody took sovereignty away from Africans, the sovereign Africans at the Cape.
This is very interesting. Let's talk about this for a minute. ACS brought a group of Africans settled there, and is it that we felt, or the sovereign Africans on the soil felt, did they feel inferior that they surrender sovereignty up to them, or they surrender control over to the ACS?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So we have to look at history.
Let me just side by side.
You have to look at history. You can't. I love that Dr. Brewer said we can't read history backwards.
Yeah.
We're talking about 1824. They did not have the will or the power. They didn't have the ability or the intent to exert themselves over the sovereign people It wasn't just one group of sovereign people. You had many nations existing in the vicinity. They didn't have the will or the force to subdue anyone or take away anyone's sovereignty. This is discussing a land contract for a portion of Cape Masorado. And these laws are governing the people who are living within the confines of the colony, of the settlement.
Okay.
It is not relevant to
people in Limba,
King Masorado clan, or to the Dukali clan, or to, King Gray, or any of these people who have their sovereignty.
That is important, as they
So
say.
in 1824, they recognize, it's not only, we talked last time about how they, the colonial agents, you talk about Eli Ayers and Captain Stockton.
Right.
Dr. Eli Ayers and Captain Stockton going and negotiating. They went to Trade Town. The Spaniards at Trade Town were still selling slaves. They were like, don't bring these abolitionists here. We're going to have another free town. We talked about all that. Yeah. They rejected that negotiation. Eventually, King Peter and others that came as Masorado, especially John S. Mill, the mulatto John S. Mill, agreed to assist them. He brought them in, introduced them to King Peter and others, and they purchased the land for far, far less than it was worth. And then, but that is the only area, the area that was ceased or given to them, right, is the area that we're discussing. They did not then go and say, we are ruling you, King Gray or King Masorado. That did not happen in 1824. That was very far. It was impossible. It was an impossibility. They would have been decimated had they tried anything like that. They didn't have the power to do that.
Right. So if you come into what we know today as around the SKD, King Gray was ruling there. They couldn't have gone there. If you can adjust your camera a little bit so that your head is kind of
okay.
You can just a
little. Is that a little better?
Yeah, just a little bit more.
Okay.
No, you can do that a little bit more to because as
all right. So.
All right, good. So what I was saying, because it's very important, right? And they always say winners write history. So because the people that settle around Cape Masorado and that group and what they did and how it went further became what we have today as Liberia. So it may appear that that was Liberia then, that group had control over people as far as people in Grand Cru. But you're saying that's not the case?
No, this first settlement, in fact, the people, the colony that settled, the Maryland Colonization Society was completely different from ACS. And the Mississippi Colonization Society, which basically settled at Sino, is completely different from ACS. So we talked about that last time. I don't want to go back through it. Somebody can go back and watch that episode. But yeah, we were talking about completely different colonies. They were completely independent of each other. They later on merged out of necessity because they needed the strength in numbers, because they started running into challenges with not only the slave traders, but also with, the British and other Europeans that, it was just easier for them to come together. Maryland asserted its independence before Liberia did, its sovereignty before Liberia did. It was a completely separate colony.
Thank you. We move on.
So this is all before Liberia becomes a commonwealth. This is when Liberia is strictly just a settlement of people. They're trying to come up with laws. ACS, the managing board of American Colonization Society in the United States, is now dictating to the colonists and their agents that they sent, along with the agents that the U.S. government sent for the recaptured Africans. They are now dictating to these people how they're going to live. And the reason for this, I had alluded to earlier, is because, if you remember, they have been rebelling, starting with the Elizabeth. They had that rebellion that killed all their dogs, threw them all overboard. And some scholars suspect that they threw some recaptured Africans overboard, but, I haven't found evidence of that. But they then come to they come to what is now Sierra Leone near Sherbro. They're they're getting sick. It was horrible. They meet other colonies that were you got John Kizzle and all these people were in the vicinity. They decided not, a lot of them decided not to go forward to Cape Masorado. But now we're at Cape Masorado. They have been there for 2 years because the alligator transferred the first group of settlers from Sierra Leone to what is now Cape Masorado, what is now Monrovia, in 1822. So even though the Elizabeth and the ship Nautilus, which had Lot Carey on it, even though those two ships landed earlier in 1821, it was not until 1822 that the alligator transferred them to Cape Masorado. So now they're at Cape Masorado for 2 years. It has been 2 years of absolute conflict and chaos. You've got the recaptured Africans under the care of Lot Carey. Before Lot Carey can get resources to take care of the recaptured Africans, he has to go through ACS. They are not giving him what he needs to provide for the people. This causes conflict. Lot Carey becomes belligerent, and there's a lot of issues. He's writing letters explaining how they're not providing the resources to the recaptured Africans that the U.S. government has allotted for them, and even accusing the ACS agents of selling the resources in Sierra Leone, that they are now, taking resources that were meant for recaptured Africans and selling them at Sierra Leone. And at the same time, you've got the African-American repatriates, other African-American repatriates who have taken on the task of teaching English and reading and literacy and things to other recaptured Africans. They too are complaining that, hey, we're not getting what is supposed to be given to us. These guys are only giving us some of the resources.
Hold on,
and so there were. Go ahead.
Hold on, because I can relate to this, and please hold that thought. Just put a marker. I was a refugee, and the things that belong to us when we were in the forest region of Guinea, sometimes those responsible for take those things and sell them for money. So now, in the very early stages, we have the recaptured Africans being headed by Lot Carey, and you have the African Americans. So right there, we had already the Americo-Liberians and Congo people, right? The recapture being the Congo people and the African American being the Americo-Liberians.
Yeah. So at that point, basically, so you've got the African Americans, you've got the recaptured Africans or Congo people who are, in the colony, and then you also have some indigenous Liberians, some sovereign Liberians who have chosen to voluntarily join the colony. Right. Some of them were employed to do some work and they decided to remain with the colony. Some of them were converted to Christianity and decided to remain with the colony. People who were also, a lot of young people, a lot of children, hey, I like how these people, operate. We're going to go and live with them. So there were also some indigenous Liberians who had voluntarily joined the colony, especially near where Lot Carey had the recaptured Africans. There were a lot of indigenous Liberians that joined the recaptured Africans to be educated and wanted to learn how to read and write and all of those things as well. So they took advantage of Lot Carey's mission work.
And now there is conflict. And most of that conflict was they have problem with how the ACS was governing them and distributing the resources.
Yes. Yes. So let's look at the first, so we talked about the law of 1824. Let's look at the first law, the law of sedition.
Sedition. Let's go into it.
So, you want to read the laws just so I don't get like dry mouth here, just rattling on?
Let me read the first law.
Okay.
Sedition, mutiny, insubordination, or disobedience to the lawful authorities are high misdemeanors and punishable either by the justice, court of sessions, or prerogative of the agent, as the case may be.
Yeah.
Sedition already? Somebody wants to overthrow the ACS?
So as I said, talk about mutiny, insubordination, this began right away on the Elizabeth. This happened right away on the Elizabeth. So all of the conflict that I was just talking about is what's leading up to this need to put these strong laws into place. Because people are writing letters back to New York. There's all these ships going back and forth between the west coast of Africa, trade ships, U.S. military ships that are coming and patrolling for recaptured Africans. And there's, provisions coming and going. So within that 2-year period from 1822 to 1824, they're getting letters not only from the agents, they're getting complaints because the African Americans could read and write. You've got Lot Carey, you've got all of these, Elijah Johnson, you've got people who can read and write, and they're complaining. And they are, to describing situations, and there were actual rebellions where at one point they all refused to listen to the ACS agent. They're like, we're not going to listen to you. What are you going to do about it? Yeah. And so there had to be a point, it came to a point where a U.S. military vessel was basically, there was a constant presence, at least a few times a month of an armed U.S. military vessel that would come just as a deterrent for, to stop the African Americans and recaptured Africans from mutiny.
Yeah.
To say, hey, look, we've got force here. If you guys do anything, if you guys, dismantle ACS, we're going to come after you. So this had absolutely nothing to do at this point with the sovereign Africans in the vicinity. This is a group of people that have been resettled somewhere. They've got conflict with the people who are supposed to be almost like the guardians, as if they're children or, subhuman. And then on the other hand, you've got your sovereign Africans, some of whom have been incited against the colonists because they're abolitionists. And so you've got that conflict as well. So this is a period of complete, chaos. So they bring these laws in. So this is a law of sedition that they brought in. So basically, all of these laws, the ultimate authority is the Board for the American Colonization Society.
And that's
because this is their investment.
Yeah.
This is a financial investment more than anything, because they're not only dealing with dues, they're dealing with money, resources coming from the government, they're dealing with private donations, and they're managing money and resources. So this becomes a lucrative venture. They're also starting to realize that they can now involve themselves in tariffs and trade. So there's a lot of ships coming into Cape Masorado, and now they're in a position where they're controlling trade, and they're able to levy, taxes in a sense, where that role and responsibility used to belong to the previous holders of the land.
Yeah.
And the other thing that has happened, and we'll get into it, but slavery is no longer allowed at Cape Masorado. So you can no longer sell human beings at the port.
Right.
Before, in fact, up to 1822, even after the settlers arrived, shortly thereafter, they were still selling people into slavery right at Cape Masorado. So that was put to an end, and now we're in 1824. So the next slide.
So at this time, probably King Peter is out of business because there's no more slavery.
In 1824, it's not that there's no more slavery. It's just no slavery at that little place at Cape Masorado. Trade Town is still, the Spanish people are still living at Slave Town, the Spanish slave dealers. There's still a settlement of Spanish people at Cape Town. I'm sorry, at Trade Town. I said Cape Town, that's funny, Freudian slip. At Trade Town, which is now in Bassa, right?
Yeah.
And then at Cape Mount.
Yeah, Cape Mount. Let's go to the second law, and I love this one. Quarreling, riot, drunkenness, Sabbath breaking, profaneness, and lewdness are infractions of the public peace and punishable by sentence of justices or of the Court of Sessions with fine, imprisonment, standing in the stocks, or whipping. Really?
Really. This is a law. So you're dealing with people who, and this is why when they keep saying, oh, they freed their slaves, 200 years of freedom, I get so angry. I said, this is such a fallacy. And it's so disrespectful to the truth. The truth is, this was not freedom. This was not sovereignty. This was not liberty. This was subjection.
Yeah. And they say quarreling, at that time. I hope no crew person was on this, or that's a joke.
So the early people who Liberians who joined the settlement, the earliest sovereign Africans who joined the settlement were the Day, Gola, Bassa crew, the people in that vicinity. So, and even Madingo. So you have, and even maybe, so you had a couple of people joining the settlement, like I said, mostly young people. And even some of the recaptured Africans even took wives from native, people or sovereign Africans.
Of course.
People were interacting this early on. There was no isolation. Nobody was preventing anyone from joining them in the settlement. But if you joined the settlement, you had to, at Masorado, you had to change your way of life. You had to become like them if you were going to live among them. That was the rule.
And you must obey these laws. And here, this presupposes that we have the code. There was some established authority, courts, right?
ACS established, and they would handpick who was going to be doing what. And like I said, many of the African Americans who repatriated voluntarily were educated freemen. So a lot of them had these roles of justices.
Okay. Good. So it goes back to your point that the arrival of the settlers or the freemen or the repatriated African American did not represent freedom, as people would want to say it. Because
right. I mean, this
the suggestion.
No political scientist is going to call this sovereignty. This is not sovereignty.
Law number 3: persons having violated the peace or committed the misdemeanor specified in section 1st, on being discharged from custody, must find reconnaissances for their good behavior. Most of these people were anyway. Go ahead, Cobb.
Yeah, I mean, this is what you do in a prison colony.
Yeah.
Basically, this is what you do in a prison colony. This is like, almost just a step above Robben Island. And you can start to see the audacity of them to put this into law. But imagine what was happening that they had to put these laws into place. And even the laws are so repressive. They didn't just say we're going to obey the laws that are in the United States. No, because that's what most people would do. I mean, that's what Sierra Leone basically did. Is like, you're living under British law. We got to, follow these rules. No stealing, no killing, no, whatever. No, they're telling these people down to how you're going to have conflict. You can't even have conflict with another person. Verbal conflict is considered if you swear. You can't, I mean, it was just crazy, micro managing and extreme control, determined, when people can, come and go. They had to go to church on Sunday. There was absolutely, it was insane. They wanted complete control over these people and not allow them to exert their self-determination.
And there's something called violating the peace. I don't know whatever that meant.
It means whatever the ACS agent says it is. If you have a meeting with 4 or 5 people and say, you know what, we're not going to go and do their public works project this time. We're going to work on our own farms. Well, you're inciting people, you're violating the peace. We're going to put you in chains and shackles, and you're going to go and do the work anyway, which is what happened quite a lot.
And even if you were free from jail, they say you must have a bond, find reconnaissances for the good behavior. So
So
you may
basically, you have to labor and pay,
yeah.
usually some compensation for your freedom. You had to purchase your freedom in essence.
Even though you already serve your custody, you are discharged from custody, but you're not totally free yet.
Exactly.
Law number 4, simple theft, in which the property stolen shall be less than 5 shillings, is petite larceny,
Hmm.
and shall always be punished in pursuance of sentence of justices or court of sections by a fine of fourfold the value of the property stolen, and the culprit to fine reconnaissance in 20 times the amount. Who? These guys were.
So this gets back into that whole indentured servitude, right? You had to basically now you are now a slave to your crime that you committed, and you have to buy your freedom again. And if you were convicted or just falsely accused, right? Somebody says, you know what? I'm going to say you stole my watch because I don't like your attitude. Some agent says, you know what? This black guy, he's a little bit too uppity. I'm going to say he stole my watch. Convict him of, so a lot of these convictions were not even truthful.
Yeah.
These laws were used as an excuse to confine people and take away the little bit of liberty that they had. Anyone who was rebellious or wanted to assert themselves as a man would be subject to this. So Liberia, the colony of Liberia at Cape Masorado, these were the conditions. And the thing is, you have literate people, you have people who were born on the continent of Africa, some of whom were warriors that were captured and taken, sold into slavery, some of whom came from prominent African family groups and had self-determination until they were captured and sold into slavery. So some of these people are extremely, disgusted. And mind you, in 1824, most of the African Americans were born free that were in the colony at the time. Very few of them, and in 1824, were not born free. That's a very important thing that we need to think about. So it's not like these people were used to being slaves. Being a recaptured African doesn't mean you're used to being a slave. It means you were illegally enslaved and rescued.
Right.
You had a whole life before you were taken into slavery.
And so here's this, you stole 5 cents, or let's say 5 shillings, let's say 5 cents. The punishment here, you will be fined 5 times 4, 20 cents. And if you serve your time and you get out, you're going to pay or work for your freedom 20 times. You're going to pay $1 now for your freedom. That's interesting. Law number 5, grand larceny and all felonies punishable in pursuance of judicial sentence with whipping and imprisonment, either in irons or not, or by a term of labor in chains or on the public works. In case of failure to find reconnaissances for good behavior when required, the person so failing shall be subjected to such labor on the public works, or other penalty as the agent shall prescribe, until he shall find reconnaissance, or the object for which it was required of him shall have been answered. You can tell, that these people were Christians. So it's like the language, it has some, maybe that's old English, but it has some biblical words and implication in them.
Yeah, and so we're talking about 1824. So in 1824, religion, the world was, they're coming from the Victorian era. Christianity was considered civilization at that time. And if you even read some of the Islamic manuscripts from the time period, it's the same thing. Everything leads with religion. Everything leads with the belief system in God. So I don't want people watching this to think that, this was strange in that time period. This was perfectly normal for that time period, for everything to be premised on religion. You read Jewish texts, it's the same thing. You read Muslim texts, it's the same thing. You read anything driven by Christians, you're going to have that, you must observe the Sabbath and all of this kind of thing. But what I do think for me is extremely contradictory to the narrative written by non-Liberian historians, painting a picture of this philanthropic do-good organization that liberated or freed Black people is a complete lie by their own judgment and their own rules, and how they saw these people as their subjects and not even dealing with them, not even as human beings, before you'll say children. This is absurd. You're talking about putting people in chains and do it for things that have nothing to do with, it's just, but again, you have to remember, these people are Black. And in 1824, the United States was still practicing chattel slavery. Most of the Western Hemisphere was still practicing chattel slavery. So they still couldn't even see these people's humanity.
This larceny, grand larceny, so that was felony. This petty theft. It says it's
well, grand larceny and all felonies.
Oh, and all felonies.
And all felonies.
Oh, are punishable.
Mm-hmm.
And what's up with this thing?
And most of the time, the crimes were like, vagrancy, refusal to work. This other person, they eventually start, they did horrible things. They banished people from the colony, if you were too troublesome, and, all kinds of things. And there was even there was a suspicion that some of the recaptured Africans, when they decided that we're not going to adhere after, Locke Carey had met his demise in that accident, but Locke Carey was advocating for them when he died in that explosion. They wanted to separate. A lot of them turned up missing. And the agents started arguing that, hey, we sent those recaptured Africans back to where they came from. And there were rumors that they were sold back into slavery, that they gave them to slave dealers. There were all kinds of rumors flying, but the argument, the documented history, the accepted history, the established history, is that these people were repatriated to their countries of origin that was supposedly near Liberia, which I seriously think that doesn't even make sense, because many of these people were Ebo from all the way, in what is now Nigeria.
Law number 6. Every able-bodied male person receiving rations is to labor for the public under the supervision of the Commissioner for Public Works, 2 days in each week. Every person is to be considered in good health. Who shall refuse to report himself and afford satisfaction of his inability to labor to the Committee of Health? And my question here is, these laws cover only the Black people. The ACS themselves were exempt.
Of course, they didn't have to do any work.
Let me go through some of them. 7, every able-bodied person has aforesaid, or person not reporting his indisposition has aforesaid, neglecting to labor on public works, or negligently attending to his own domestic labor. You can do stuff for yourself. During the 4 days of each week, allow him shall, on the representation of the Committee of Public Works, be immediately, together with his family, put on his own resources. Number 8, no person forfeiting his rations shall have them restored in less than 1 month. Let me understand that. So you forfeit your ration, you're supposed to get this, or maybe your 3 cups of rice and 1 tin of oil, and you forfeit it. I wonder what would be the reason for forfeiting your.
You don't voluntarily forfeit. What they would consider forfeiting your rations, you didn't do enough work. You didn't do enough work, so you're not getting your rations.
Oh,
And so if you're a recaptured African and you didn't do whatever it is you're supposed to do, you're forfeiting your rations. And so you're not going to get new rations no matter how hard you work until the following month. Mind you, these are the things Black Kerry and others were accusing them of, selling the rations in Sierra Leone. So if they were really doing that, there's a lot of reason for them to be looking for excuses not to give people rations.
yeah. Because you wanted money.
And trust me, I choose to believe Black Kerry and others who complained over the ACS agents.
Yeah, I want to believe that too, because people, when I was in Guinea, they sold my ration. I know that. Law number 9.
All right.
Persons obstinately refusing to acquiesce in the express decision of the Board of Managers shall, on conviction thereof by a court of justice, forfeit all their real estate in the colony and be compelled to leave it. Wow. So Black Africans had real estate.
Yeah, so the colony basically divided the area at Cape Masorado. It was undeveloped, it was unsettled. So they divided this area up into parcels, and each family was given a parcel. Each head of household was given a parcel of land to work, to be able to grow food, build their own, shelter, and be able to feed themselves. So they had to, 2 days of the week, work for ACS, doing whatever ACS wanted them to do, build their houses, maybe till their farms. And then, the rest of the time, except Sunday, they would work on their own farms.
Yeah. You have 4 days for yourself.
So if you did anything to refuse, if you didn't listen to the board, whatever, so the U.S. government gave these people money to purchase land to repatriate these people. This land belonged to these people. But what they did, instead of giving them the land, they kept control of it and used it as a tool of coercion. That if you don't do what we say, we'll take it from you, which they had no legal right to do, because the procurement of that property for those recaptured Africans was done by the U.S. government. So ACS did not really have the legal authority to even threaten to take them off of land that didn't belong to them. It was not the American Colonization Society who negotiated with King Peter and his colleagues. It was Eli Ayers and Dr. Ayers and Captain Stockton, who were U.S. government agents, acting on behalf of this project to resettle these people, but the land was being procured for them.
Well, I wonder what was the U.S. government role now, because these things, I believe, were reported.
So yes, and so you got some African Americans writing letters complaining, saying, hey, they're ill-treating the recaptured Africans, they're ill-treating us. The provisions you're sending for the recaptured Africans are supposed to be coming to the households that they're being sheltered in so that we can take care of them properly. They're not giving us the resources, they're keeping them, they're selling them in Sierra Leone. And then you have the agents writing and saying something else. The US government is going to believe the European Americans over the African Americans. That's just how it is. It still happens to this day.
Law number 10. Persons trespassing on appropriated lands by cutting or removing timber or other property are liable to exemplary damages. So
just basically, if you trespass, steal somebody else's stuff, props or whatever, cut down somebody's plum tree, or I don't know. So that pretty much speaks for itself.
Or even go make a farm somewhere you shouldn't, or garden, or go and cut a tree.
Right. So they're taking land from people, from recaptured Africans mostly, because they're the most rebellious ones, and they're taking their land away from them illegally. And they're now landless. So if they go and say, hey, I'm going to use, John Doe's land, and if John Doe, can I plant some cassava here? John Doe say, yeah, my brother, plant some cassava. I know they took your land. Well, if ACS finds out, they're not saying, You know, I mean, it's just absurd. Or if it's even unoccupied land that hasn't yet been, you know, shared out, and you just say, oh, you know what, since nobody's using this, let me go plant my cassava, and they find out that you're doing that, this is what the punishment would be.
Law number 11. No person is to reside on the lands of the colony without permission of the society or their agent. So now there is a land of the colony that they've purchased. And what is this saying here? I mean,
it's basically saying that if they banish you or send you away, you can't live there. It's also saying if sovereign Africans want to join the colony, the African Americans and the recaptured Africans are not the ones that are going to give them permission. They have to go through the agent, through the society, to get permission. Because, and this is important, because Lot Carey was missioning to all these people, and he was creating a situation where a lot of indigenous sovereign Africans were joining his mission. Now they no longer want those numbers to increase, so they're saying you have to pass through the society, the American Colonization Society. We're the ones who are clearing the brush and building these roads. If you want to come and live in our town, because it's really what it was a town. If you want to live in our town, you need to go through us. Lot Carey doesn't have the authority to let you live in his area. Nobody does, only ACS.
No subletting. You can sublease our...
I mean, absurd.
Oh, wow. Number 12, expulsion from the colony may take place on conviction for offenses directly affecting the peace and good government of the same, and when ordered by the society in punishment of any misdemeanor, in their judgment, observing that penalty. The property of exiles to pass to his next heir resident in the colony. In all cases of banishment, where the banished person has no heirs in the colony, the land held by him shall revert to the colony. When we put you out, your son...
they put a lot of people out. If you were being what they felt like you were not following by the rules, you had to leave.
And where do you go?
Probably get sold into slavery.
Right,
I don't know. I mean, some people were able to hitch rides, you know, to go to Sierra Leone. Some people went native. Some people went and joined the especially a lot of at this period, the recaptured Africans were also being absorbed by the local people too, the people in the vicinity. Yeah. So there was a cross infusion. You did have some, you know, people that could not stand the circumstances. They wanted to live like they used to live, you know, where they came from. So there were cases, legitimate cases, where people, even if they weren't banished, voluntarily deserted the colony.
Let's take a short break and we'll be right back.
At Focus on Liberia, we discuss everything Liberia, from education to politics, arts and culture, entertainment, agriculture, history, religion, family, and technology. Focus on Liberia uncovers and showcases the best of Liberia and shows the world the truth about Liberia. We educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We conduct interviews, panel discussions, debates, and more. Tune in to Focus on Liberia on Facebook and YouTube and be a part of the stories that make up the news.
This is Focus on Liberia, and I am Tanneh-Chewlae.
Welcome back to Focus on Liberia. We are discussing the birth of the African Republic, part 4. And in this, we are talking about the laws. When the free slaves, the ACS came, they made laws for the people, being the repatriated Africans and also the recaptured Africans. And we're going through those laws. Let's look at law number 13. Number 13, the party in any judicial trial is entitled, if he desired, to trial by jury. Number 14, the common law and usages of the courts of Great Britain and the United States to regulate all judicial proceedings. 15, all persons are permitted to dispose of property by will. The estate of interstates to be committed with letters of administration to administrators appointed by the agent. 16. In all lands appropriated to settlers, every third lot, when practicable, shall be reserved for public uses. What does that mean?
If land's appropriated to settlers, every third lot, so they have lots.
Oh, there's an issue with your audio.
I'm sorry, you're saying which? Say that again.
There's issue with your audio. So you probably.
I don't know why that happens sometimes. Like, you want me to go out and come back in?
Yes, please.
Okay.
So in the meantime, we're going to be looking at some comments here, and Tobasi said the ACS was a racist organization. He repeats that. Batom Kula, call focus on Liberia. You give us two definitions of the word colony. In essence, Liberia was indeed colonized, just not in the way Sierra Leone was. River says Pro, should we have considered all the agents handpicked by the ACS as presidents of our country? All of the presidents of Ghana, Nigeria, and other African countries were bona fide citizens of those countries. Tobasi is saying Liberia is a colony of America. Look up the treaty America signed with Liberia. We have Elizabeth is watching us from Paris, France. Thank you, Elizabeth, for watching. Tobasi said the ACS was a very racist organization. Also, the ACS sided with the American Liberian over the indigenous people discrimination 101. William Dunbar, he thinks so, and just listening to him gave me the impression that he was one of those people who argued with the teacher and got nowhere at the end of the day. Who's that, William? Half of the time, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Rather interesting. All right, those are a few of your comments. Again, you are watching Focus on Liberia. We are discussing the laws that were made during the early part of the colony. That's Liberia. Again, presented here is Carl Famula. Carl, let's go. I read some comments there that we wanted, but you were talking about the law number 16. In all the lands appropriated to settlers, every third lot, when practicable, shall be reserved for public uses.
Yeah, so it was, this is interesting because they were doing a lot of trading and doing a lot of other things. So public uses could have been, community farms. It could have been the projects for ACS agents. It could have been, hey, I want you guys to grow my, my goods on this land. Who knows? But yeah, they were trying to also make it orderly so that you didn't have everyone's farms just running into each other. That is part of the way they laid out rural communities in the United States as well. So a lot of this practice was borrowed of how they do lots and how they structure towns and townships in the United States at this period for new settlements.
So if you have three lots of land, lot number 1 belongs to you, lot number 2 belongs to you, lot number 3 will be reserved for public uses.
Yes. Whenever possible. It wasn't always, at that time, there weren't that many people in 1824.
And I wonder it gets returned to you after that use or it remained for public use. We don't know.
What do you mean?
Well, lot number 3 for me now. Well,
so the way the ACS did it was it would only allot. So a parcel of land is not necessarily a lot like how we have lots now. A lot is a house spot. So at that time, that parcel of land could have been 5 acres.
Okay.
So every third spot, I don't even think it was that much land really, but I'm just, the area at Cape Masorado was large enough and the population small enough that they could have gaps in between ownership and have public use lands.
Law number 17. No person shall own lands who does not reside in the colony and cultivate at least 2 acres or carry on with consent of the agent some mechanical trade and build a substantial house on his own lot. A substantial house, to answer the requisition of the preceding section, must be first of sufficient extent to accommodate the family. So they are defining substantial house.
Basically, unlike other colonization societies that were structured along the coast, they're determining for people what is a house. Because you have all of these recaptured Africans, and you want to tell them that, hey, this hut you're building is not a house.
And that is not that doesn't entitle you to something. Was that the understanding?
Yes. So they had to basically, it was a way to force them to live in the type of housing that they felt was sufficient, because they did not want, this whole mat house thing that we see in Liberia, I don't think it's native to Liberia. Because they talk about these recaptured Africans weaving, these mats and using them to build structures. And the way that they talk about this in the early 1800s is as if it is alien to the area. It's strange, and I don't know if this is something that happened all over West Africa, but something that was introduced by these recaptured Africans, and our people just borrowed it, for temporary housing too. But they didn't want things like that. They wanted actual homes. They didn't want huts. They didn't want, mat houses. They didn't want any of this. They wanted actual homes. They wanted a place to look like a westernized environment. And so they were very strict with the type of homes that could be constructed within the confines of the ACS controlled area.
All right, let's go to some comments here. And this one, we answered this earlier from Tanneh-Chewlae, saying whether Liberia was colonized or not. This one from Tobasi: where do Liberian writers and authors sell their books? Do we have a society? Do we, as a society, have a modern bookstore in Monrovia? Do we have a modern library? Maybe you want to ask.
Yeah, I mean, it's 2022. The only time I really go to a library is when I'm taking my young girls, 4 and 6 years old, because there's lots of hands-on things I want them to learn. But also, like, if I'm going to go dig through some archive where I can't order the book and have it sent to me because they won't release it, and you have to sign up and go through all this stuff before you can go, touch something. But other than that, I don't go to the library anymore. Everything's digitized. You can reach out to a school or a library and get everything online. I mean, your phone has access to a lot, especially if you live in the US or Canada or anywhere in Europe, has access to all kinds of things. So you should have access to almost every public library on the planet. And every single month, Google is working with all these libraries to digitize resources that are not under copyright. So, and this is literally thousands of materials on Liberia. We're fighting to get digitized through different libraries. So within the next 5 years, most of these rare books and primary source documents will be available for free online. And that is wonderful news, because you shouldn't have to pay for information about yourself. And so hopefully, they'll continue to do that. Liberian History Guild's been working on that too. You've got the University of Indiana Library resources. All of the resources at University of Indiana are free to the public, and they're available online. You've got so much stuff. Plus, Amazon has every book Dr. Dunn's ever written, every book Dr. Burroughs ever written, every book that Dr. Guanu's ever written. So we have access to these books.
Yeah. Tanneh-Chewlae said you gave us 2 definitions of the word colony. In essence, Liberia fit the second definition. So Liberia indeed was colonized, except that it was not colonized like Ghana or Sierra Leone. That's Tanneh-Chewlae. What's your response?
I've already answered that. Liberia was not colonized. It just wasn't. I mean, if you want to start getting into, economic colonization, if you want to talk about military colonization, if you want to get into those things, it would happen much later. The U.S. Economic exploitation of our resources, especially with the construction of Firestone, labor exploitation, destroying our agricultural resources. I mean, that's a different show. But the reason the entire world is in agreement that Liberia was never colonized is because it was not colonized, and not because we don't understand what that means. Doesn't mean we should argue with it. We should seek to understand what that definition, the established definition of being a colonized nation, means.
Thank you. I want to read this one. It's a big one here, but I want us to go through it because Christopher kind of repeat this most of the time, so I want us to deal with it today. He said, uncomfortable conversation with people you don't agree with are incredibly important. The original sin of the American Liberian is discrimination, bias, bigotry, classism, intolerance, unfairness, inequality, favoritism, etc. Also, disparity, economic disparity between different regions of the country. For almost 200 years, the American Liberian planted the seed of hatred towards the indigenous country people, folks. Folks, we must have these uncomfortable conversations without any fear. That's Tobasi, and Tobasi always speak about things like that. Can you speak to this?
Well, the show is in the context of 1824. And that is something that we don't do history backwards. So this has not occurred yet. We don't have classism yet. We don't have any of this happening yet. So any classism that existed in 1824 was within the colony and outside of the colony amongst the sovereign Africans. Because to say that the original sin of these people that arrived, and we're talking about 1824, was discrimination, it just doesn't even make sense in the context of 1824. That's something we can discuss in the context of 1945, maybe 1945, but not 1824. We're talking about a period where the sovereign Africans had more power and in many cases more wealth and weapons than the people in the colony. So, I mean, if you want to talk in a later show, we're going to talk about how this classism and the idea of Western supremacy falls in and plays with white supremacy and how all that stuff comes together. The closer you are to being Western or European or acting like you're not African, the better you are. These are concepts that we have all internalized as a people. And to put that onus on captured Africans and African Americans who were repatriated, I think is just, not only is it a very one-dimensional, not even two-dimensional, very one-dimensional view of history, it also dehumanizes us as Indigenous people in so many ways, as if we were nothing, that these people came and we needed them to give us existence. That's not what happened. When they came, our people were sovereign. Our people had our own countries. And I put an S at countries because that's what it was. This was not one place. We had conflicts with each other. For God's sakes, we're selling each other into slavery. So when you talk about these people coming in, and then later on, as we become educated, we start wanting to be part of the greater picture of Liberia, because there's only two ways that you can incorporate people into a country. It's either by will or by force. And, we have to talk about that as this show progresses. I don't want to go off on a tangent and talk about something off topic, but the question we should be asking is, one, did everyone become Liberian? Did all the autonomous Africans living within the territory become Liberian through a similar process? The answer is no. I am from Nimba. We did not become Liberian through the same process that the people of Sino became Liberian. The people of Grand Cape Mount did not become Liberian through the same process that the people of Grand Jita became Liberian. So the question should be, is it will or force? When did we become Liberian? And was it because we wanted to become Liberian, or was it because we're forced to be Liberian? But in 1824, my ancestors were probably not even aware of this little settlement on the coast. And so we were not being discriminated against by anyone at that time, but ourselves, because every society, you know, the people in the Southeast were the most egalitarian society. But when you go into the north and central part of Liberia, Cape Mount, you know, what is now Lofa, Balpulu, Nimba, Bone, you had extreme stratification of not only wealth, but power. You did not have everyone living on an equal plane, and there was extreme discrimination, you know, even between ethnic groups and within ethnic groups. So this is not the property of any group of human beings, and that's just what it is.
Right, and talking about 1824, like you stated before, the ACS was in control. So African
it's just a strange comment to make, because we've been taught, this is the only thing we've been taught about Liberian history. So even when you're talking about a completely different topic that predates the grievance that we have, right? That's all they can think about. We just spent an hour discussing a situation that is completely removed, but this person's mind cannot conceive of himself or his country outside of that paradigm. And that's sad and unfortunate, because that's all he's been told his entire life. And so a lot of young Liberians who think, even older people, who think they're progressive, who think that they're patriotic, who think that they're, you know, knowledgeable, they regurgitate this line without any context, as if it is the only thing that brought this country into being. And it is a lie. That is not what makes Liberia Liberia. That is a component of many complex stories that brought us into being. It should not be even the centerpiece.
It shouldn't be the centerpiece about this division, discrimination, and
it shouldn't be the centerpiece of what, because that's not what made our country. In fact, it was the opposite that made our country. If it was not for the unity, the cooperation, if it was not for the indigenous members of of the armed forces, of the frontier forces, if it was not for those bold sovereign warriors that fought the French, that fought the British, that stood up for their land that they still own to this day, there would be no Liberia. If you look at the map, the part of Liberia that sticks up into the French territory of Guinea, do you think that someone just gave that to us, or do you think it was American Liberians that went up there and fought for that land? If they didn't fight to defend their land, they would be Guineans today. Not Nimba would be in Guinea today if Nimbayans didn't fight for their land. It was not given to us. And the whole question of people not even thinking, a lot of times, when they talk about, why do you need a tribal certificate? Why does the government need a tribal certificate before they can give us a concession? Why is it that you cannot just go to Grand Jita and just buy forest land without a tribal concession? It's because we never lost our sovereignty. Land, your control over your land is your sovereignty. And Liberians don't get that. Because what ends up happening is you go to school and you look at the way you live and you say, oh, why am I not living in a concrete house? Why am I not doing this? As if you're ashamed of your traditional way of living, and someone was supposed to have come and beat your great-great-grandfather and treat him the way ACS treated the recaptured Africans. 'Is that what we wanted? Is that what we wanted? Did we want somebody to come in and say, if you don't build a house like this, we're going to put you in chains and take your land from you? Is that what we wanted to happen to us?
If you want to join the conversation, please call 605-313-6004. The code is 791403. We have 20 minutes to end the broadcast. So please call. And while you prepare to call, we're going to take a short break.
From Pennsylvania, and you're watching Focus on Liberia.
Welcome back to Focus on Liberia. We are discussing the birth of the African Republic. This is part 4, and we are talking about the laws, those laws that govern us as a people in 1824. And my guest and the presenter of this is Carl Famule. Carl is also the public policy analyst here at Focus on Liberia. So, Carl, as we conclude this, as we wait for people to call, let's wrap this up. You have a group of people. They came. The ACS is in control. They started accusing them of corruption. The ACS is making draconian laws to govern the people, and here we are. What do you make of this, and especially when you see what the country has become today? Does that have any implication to who we are today as a people?
Yeah, I mean, so it does, because when they set up, when they started independence, which will be our next show, they rebuked a lot of these rules, and they put in protections for the sovereign Africans, especially when you start, the protections that they put in for the sovereign Africans exist nowhere else on the continent of Africa. And that protection is our land sovereignty.
Yeah.
It's maintained to this day. And Dr. Brandy did excellent work with the late great Dr. Sawyer through the Governance Commission and the subsequent Land Commission that Dr. Brandy headed, to ensure that initial spirit of protecting land rights from 1847 forward of indigenous people remained intact. It is still intact to this day, and it's written into law still to this day. And it's important, and we'll talk about that the next episode. But so yes, they did not want to do what the United States had done to its indigenous population, which is to decimate them and take their land. It was a choice, and they made sure that the Europeans could not do so either, though they tried, and even tried to do many things. So we never talk about that aspect. I mean, I see the comments, everybody wants to talk about this discrimination. You know about the discrimination already. You know that Christians thought that heathens were bad and they needed to be converted to Christianity. You know that Muslims thought that heathens were bad, they needed to be converted to Islam. That is just what it is. There has never been a time in Liberia, even before 1822, the Muslims came in, they looked down on the people who didn't worship Allah, and they thought they sold them into slavery. The miracle Liberians came, they were Christians, they looked down on the heathens. The heathen children, like myself, went to school, became Christian, and looked down on their own parents. That is what happens when you change your culture and you become, you ascribe to these foreign religions. That's what happens. You start to think like you're conquerors. You think about yourself and your ancestors in the same eye, through the same eyes as your conquerors. So to be sitting here harping on it like it's something odd, you know, that doesn't make sense to me. How many of you who have become westernized would go back and live like your third or fourth great grandfather lived? And much of the resentment and the anger that you saw coming up in the 70s and 80s was people having legitimate, like, thinking. It was almost like, oh, so my eyes open now. Oh, so our people were living in hut, and these people living in house. As if somebody took a house away from us. We don't respect our rich tradition, our rich heritage. And it's even to the extent that we even think that people should have forced us to be like them. And we're angry that they didn't force our great-grandparents to be like them. Why? Why do we think about our history in that context instead of seeing the beauty of the fact that we were not treated the way how people were treated in Ivory Coast or Guinea? You know, and this whole thing with discrimination, do you think colonialism was good? Do you think that a Pella woman, like our Vice President Joe Howard Taylor, do you think she has a counterpart in the Pella community in Guinea? Do you think that that's by accident? We talk about things only on one-sided, skewed way, and it's always the negative, and we exacerbate it and blow it up and make it bigger than anything else. And we refuse to. I mean, I hear people say all the time, oh, they didn't educate us, they didn't send us to school. The moment Lacary's feet touched the ground, he started trying to teach. And it even caused contention. Lacary Mission, which came about 80 years after Lacary died, the Lacary Mission was built in his honor. And what happened? The Muslim people fought Lacary Mission. They didn't want it there. They didn't want their children learning to be Christians. Because people respect themselves and their traditions. They don't want to change. They don't want to be like the foreigners. So it's very difficult to convert an entire country and westernize an entire country by will. It's even difficult to do it by force.
Thank you. Thank you, Carl. We don't have calls yet. Let me read 2 more comments and then we can close. Mormon Harris, so what happened in 1824? Didn't the settlers come in with the perception that they were better than the indigenous African? Can you deny that?
Yes or no? So they knew that they were Africans. That's why they were going back to Africa. So they didn't think they were better than Africans in the sense that they weren't human beings, like how Europeans didn't think of Africans as human beings. These people knew where they thought they were better is that they felt that they were more educated and that they were Christian and not heathen. That's the language of the time. Because our people's traditional religion is not respected by Christianity. It's not respected by any of the Abrahamian religions. Muslims don't respect it either. Right. So, you know, this idea, it wasn't that they didn't recognize humanity. It's that the cultural difference. There was a sense of cultural supremacy. We can read and write. We worship Jesus. We wear these kinds of clothes. Right. And the same thing continues to this day.
Lasana Kamara said, country like Liberia was built on discrimination and it is still visible in that country.
I mean, I disagree with that completely. I disagree with that completely for reasons I already stated. I mean,
thank you, Carl.
Yeah, the discrimination existed before 1822 on the Grain Coast.
Yeah, even in our own families, you know.
Everybody's just not the same. Yeah, people always look for a reason to think they're better than somebody. Oh, I'll flying past you. Oh, I'm taller than you. Oh, this other tribe, y'all like sharpen your teeth. We don't sharpen our teeth. You're savage. You know, oh, you people don't, you know, you don't pray to Allah. You're savages. This is human nature. This is what happens.
Yeah, Carl, I want you to look at this because sometimes when you say this, it looks like Mama Harris say this the brutal part of our history we must acknowledge. Are you dismissing that there was no discrimination during these years? Is that what you're saying, Carl?
I just completely spent all this time explaining that there was discrimination and what it was, and that it was, I'm wondering why people feel the need to play victim for a time period like 1822. Why people are projecting their personal shame on a generation that could not have possibly felt discriminated against. You cannot project your personal 21st century insecurities on Africans who were sovereign and respected themselves. In 1824, you cannot project your modern day insecurities and self-esteem upon King Peter. He didn't think like you.
Right. And just as you said, no persons forfeiting his rations shall have them restored in less than 1 month. So these are the laws. So nobody is denying that things were all, everybody was singing hallelujah anyhow. Yes, there was discrimination. People were accusing the ACS of even selling their ration to Sierra Leone. Just like,
they were accusing the ACS of also reselling recaptured Africans into slavery. They were accusing them of all kinds of horrible things. But at this point in 1824, nobody was forced. I mean, what we're doing is we're looking at history backwards.
Yeah.
We're putting on our 1980 hats because we're all children, descendants of children. We're children of the coup, the 1980 coup, and we're trying to project that onto 1824. It just doesn't make any sense. That was not the world that these people lived in. In 1824, they could have wiped out the colonies far easier than what Samuel Doe did in 1980. There's been no time in the history of Liberia where the government of Liberia could not have been wiped out at a moment's notice. It existed with the consent of our people. And there's no one group of people called Native people. We have many, many nations within this umbrella we call Liberia, who all have different experiences with the government, the central government. The relationships are different. They were incorporated at different times. Some were incorporated because they refused to be colonized by the French and intentionally remained a part of the Republic of Liberia. And so the stories are all different. There's also Trade Town, which was violently captured by Hootie Ashman and with the assistance of some British troops. And they expelled the Spaniards that were living there. How many of you know that there were white Spaniards living in Bassa, trading in human beings up until Liberia was established? So these are all things that, we need to talk about. And yes, did people feel that to be Christian, to speak English, to be educated was better than to be in the bush, not wearing the Western clothes and practicing traditional African spirituality was considered devil worship or heathen? Absolutely. People still think that to this day. Right now, the children, the descendants of these people that you think are being discriminated against, all of y'all are writing on here. As soon as someone talks about traditional African religion, oh, that witchcraft. Oh, the devil worshipers. And you're not thinking that you yourself are discriminating against your own culture, your own people, because you've not put on the cloak of a Christian. And it's the same way when I see Muslim people say, oh, the American Liberians were discriminated. Did your ancestors not discriminate against people that you thought were heathens also? And not allow them to marry your daughters to this very day. Yeah. How many Muslim people allow people who don't worship an Abrahamian God to marry their daughters?
Right. Today is still a problem, especially in Nimba, right?
So the fact that people want to sit here and act like it's, the property of one group of people to be snobbish and culturally, ethnocentric it's absurd. And at the same time, you had indigenous people who were also looking at this other group of people. My people used to look at Pele people funny. The Vai people used to keep Pele people as slaves. Let's talk the truth and the entire story. Why would you want to, because they had control of the government, and then we gotta get into details of what does it even mean to be a miracle Liberian or Congo or what? It's the people who were first educated and sent to school. How many of those people even actually descended from people from America? Many of the people that were in control of government were also the descendants of sovereign Africans that they met on the ground, that were educated early on, joined the colony early on, became civilized. And I use that in parentheses because I don't believe that being Christian is the only way to be civilized, or being Muslim is the only way to be civilized. But that was the prevailing thought period at that time, and it still is today. Majority of Liberians think if you're not Christian, you're not civilized.
Okay. Thank you.
And
Go ahead and complete your thought.
yeah, so I'm saying all of that to say that we keep repeating or regurgitating this propaganda against our own country, this hate of ourselves. Oh, they were built on discrimination. Liberia was not built on discrimination. Liberia was built on liberation. We set the tone for the rest of Africa to free itself. We were the catalyst that inspired the rest of Africa to free itself. Do we have classism? Did we have classism? Yes. Do we have classism today? Yes. Does classism exist in the United States? Yes. But Liberia in 1847 was more progressive, more just than any country in the world except Haiti. Liberia in 1847 was more just than the United States of America, that was still holding human beings in chattel slavery. Liberia, I will argue, as a public policy professional and a student of political science and history, that in 1980, Liberia was more just and equal than the United States of America was in 1980.
That's something we can leave for another discussion with that comparison. Tomorrow, join us at 11 a.m. Herbal Remedies for Longevity and Chronic Care. We have a brother from Uganda. He's going to be talking to us on lifestyle changes to address the rising cases of cancer and diabetes in our community. You don't want to miss this. Brother Tanneh-Chewlae, he's an expert in natural healing, longevity, herbs, and also African history. He's going to be right here in studio. Also, Sunday at 6 p.m., we're going to have the FOL Justice Forum. This is the Courts of Liberia Part 3, and we're going to be looking at the Supreme Court. Councillor Frederick Jewe, Councillor Kabina Janeng, Councillor Jerome Verdier, and Attorney Mariah Yakula. They will be here so that we can talk justice. Also, on Wednesday, we're going to be talking about memorialization of the Liberian Civil War. The TRC came up with recommendations to rewrite Liberia's history and to the use of wartime memories. Transitional justice expert Aaron Yeyia will be my guest on Wednesday. You don't want to miss it. Carl, thank you again for joining us. Let's get your parting comments as we close the broadcast.
I'm sorry, say that again?
We want your closing comments so we can close the broadcast for tonight.
Yes. So the next episode, we're going to talk more about what was the inspiration for independence and asserting sovereignty. We're going to talk about and that, along with the extermination of the slave factories along the coast. And trying to rid the territory of these European slave traders that were residing in various places along the coast long before 1822. We'll spend most of our time talking about Tradetown, how Tradetown was toppled finally. And so I saw someone ask to explain the phrase, "the love of liberty brought us here." That was coined in 1847. Today's discussion is about 1824, but in 1847, clearly, if you are seeking freedom. That is the catalyst for the not only the African Americans, but the recaptured Africans who were repatriated to Liberia by the thousands, and sovereign Africans within the territory who sought refuge among the colonists because of various wars that were occurring in their sovereign areas. Buze quarters, all these places are existing within Monrovia because you had people that were fighting wars in the Northern Territories that had to seek refuge and freedom within the colony, freedom from war and persecution as well. So our story is complicated. Many of us don't know the extent to which there was chaos at the end of that slave trade and what was going on thereafter with colonial powers coming in later on in the 1880s as well. So we'll talk about that in the upcoming sessions.
Thank you so much, and we want to thank our viewers for staying here. For those who will watch later, we say keep it here at Focus on Liberia. This is where we educate, we elevate, and promote all things Liberia. Today we went into Liberian history, of course, and we're going to continue this. So whether you believe that the settlers caused all the problems or the native caused all the problems, we are where we are today, and we are all Liberians, and that's the message we want to leave with all of you. It is incumbent upon us now as the people to do whatever it takes to make Liberia that original intent of the people, to make Liberia the oasis in Africa, a land for all free Black people. What are we doing about that? And that's why we want to remind you, we are all Liberians. Have a good night and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you.
We are Liberians.